Good morning, my friends. Welcome to another Lord's Day Live. I hope that it's as beautiful a day where you're watching as it is here. Just to my right is an open window where I stand to do a lot of my prayer time. As a matter of fact, looking back on the backwoods, and boy, the sun's shining bright. A little chilly, but hey, it's February. Glad to have you along. I pray that this will be a great blessing to you. I'm excited about this particular series as far as our Bible classes are concerned, and I hope that it's being beneficial to y'all. Geo-History of the Bible. Just real quickly again, little advertisement. It's free. The Bible, can the Bible be trusted? Got a little ebook, I guess you would call it. You send me your address, and I will send you a free copy of that. And hi, Lecky. Good to see you, bro. You can get it, and I'll just send it by way of email, and you can do with it as you wish. That is the introduction to this particular series. I try to lay the foundation work with those 6 lessons on why you can trust the Bible. And now that we've established that, we need to go on that, okay, so how can I internalize the Bible? If I can trust it, now I need to internalize it. And then if I can internalize it, of course, the third step is going to be to make sure that I share it with other folks. But if you can't internalize it, then sometimes it's a struggle. Have you ever had somebody approach you and say, I know it's in the Bible somewhere? Or perhaps you've been in a situation where somebody asked you a question, you said, well, let me run ask the teacher, let me run ask the preacher, I'm sure that that kind of a thing. People want to know what you feel. People want to know how you understand the scriptures. You need to be able to internalize it. So that's what this particular series is about, so that you can internalize the book, which we have proven in the last 6 lessons can be trusted. So here we go, Geo-History of the Bible, and of course I asked you the question, do you like to doodle? Most folks do. Doesn't mean all of us are very good at it. I certainly am not, but you're sitting there waiting on your food to come at a restaurant, or maybe you're in a doctor's office and there's a little piece of scrap paper, whatever, and you get out your pencil and you doodle. I like to doodle. Well, doodling can help you to internalize. It can help you to memorize things. And so that's what we're doing this morning with this idea, and I hope that it's I hope it's a blessing to you. Everybody needs a piece of paper, just like we said last time. I'm not going to linger quite as long this time, so teachers each week you need to make sure that you got a piece of paper for your students, and pencils, crayons, whatever, doesn't matter, so that they can draw these things out. But there's my crooked line. That's your piece of paper, or at least that's the piece of paper I'm going to be using this morning. You need to have a piece of paper, turn it sideways, and we will then begin the process. Now, by way of review, remember, and by the way, I'm going to put this at the top of my paper because we got a lot of stuff to put at the bottom. And so remember, you got your ... That's a continuation. And then we're going to have our line that comes way over here, and another ... And our timeline, as you might recall, begins obviously with creation. What does he say? Let there be. All right, those are the words of God back in the creation moment. And so that's the beginning of our timeline. We know a little bit back here, but not a lot. We know a little bit over here, but not as much as we do about the entire timeline. And so you got so what's the other book in? Well, that's you and I. Put yourself over here. Okay, there's me. There's my wife. I guess I could have drawn Gabriel but anyhow, that's us. Okay, so you got the creation and you got us, right? And then we're going to divide that timeline into approximately 3 even parts. And I say approximate. Remember, they're each 2,000 years old, or 2,000 years old, 2,000 years in length, approximately. Again, approximately. The first major division, about 2,000 years into the timeline, is, remember, the guy in the tent. What was his name? Yeah, Abraham. We'll just give him a big A. That's Abraham. The next major division is pretty easy, right? And that's Jesus. Okay, we got the cross. And so there's your 3 major, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You got your bookends, and then you got the 2 big deals in the middle that kind of separate things out. If you can put this in your head, then you're going to be able to peg various events and people. And so if I ask you, for instance, who comes first, Abraham or Moses? Well, you might not at the moment know the answer to that question, but here in a second you're going to, because you'll be able to see the timeline hopefully in your mind. You've doodled it. That's why we're doing it all over again this morning. Don't just take out your piece of paper from last time. Do it all over again so that we can have this together, okay? Hi, Mom. Looks like she's jumped in there with me this morning. All right, now what you're going to do is you're going to take each of these the first 2,000 year periods, and we're going to divide them in half. Okay? Put them in half here. Okay? So you got your first two, and they're divided in half. Now, I didn't leave myself much room on top here, but we'll try to squeeze it in. Okay? What's about 1,000 years in? Remember? That's Noah in the big boat, right? Okay? And so, well, you can know that. If you see the boat, surely you know it's Noah, right? Okay. Then you come over here, we got Abraham. Then 1,000 years after Abraham, what happens? Remember? Oops. Could have made a mess there of my thing. That is the Star of David. So that's where the kingdoms start coming in. Now, David's not the first king. We established that last time, right? He's the second king, but David's the one that we get the real establishment, the primary establishment of the kingdom that happens there. Okay, so there you got 2,000 years in, halfway, you got Noah. 2,000 years after that, you got Jesus, but halfway, you got David, right? Now what I want to do, hold it. Seemed like I did something last week. Oh yeah, we went 100 years in here, right? About 100 years here, and we drew ourselves the Bible. Bible is completed about 100 years into the first century there. And we're going to deal with that, by the way, here in just a moment in quite detail. And so hang on to that particular area. All right, now what I want to do, though, is I want to divide these two periods in half, okay? I want to take us here and seems like there was something else I want to do there. Maybe I didn't divide this one. I guess I just divide that one. I have to go back and look at my notes. Oh yeah, no, it's this one. That's what I needed to do. Right here. So take the middle section and you divide those two in half. Divide this 1,000 years and that 1,000 years, divide them in half, okay? So we're just kind of chopping up our timeline. And we're almost done, by the way, with the general timeline. All right, who can tell me what happens about 500 years between Abraham and this event? Then in about 500 more years, and you're going to get David. Can anybody guess what would be the middle character there? We've already talked about him. I'm going to draw some 10 Commandments here, okay? Bop, 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 bop. Can you do that? Draw your 10 Commandments. And obviously, yes, that's Moses. Okay, so Moses is going to come on the scene. That's a pretty huge deal because that's where we're going to get the law. We'll talk about that more as we deal with the geography of the Bible and things of that nature. We're going to draw pictures about the geography. But that's very important. That's Mount Sinai and various things happen. The golden calf story is going to happen. All of that stuff. Okay, so this is a very, very important time when Moses comes on the scene. So you got Abraham, 500 sort of years later you got Moses. 500 years later, sort of, you got David. And then it's another, really, it's more like 600 years, because this is about, I'm going to write this up here for you, okay? This is 400 years from here to here. I guess I should have wrote it over here. 400 years. Let's see if I can take it off. That's about 400 years from there to there. And what is it that we have during this 400 years? Well, I'll draw you another word bubble, but put a question mark in it, okay? Because God is not speaking. They call that the 400 years of silence between those two periods. And then that's kind of confusing things. How's that? About 400 years between here and here. And by the way, we'll see it later, but in our timeline, Esther, the story of Esther is going to take us almost up to this point. I'm going to tell you in times to come that if you will take the Old Testament and you'll take Genesis through Esther, just those books, those are the books of history or that gives us history. They actually are classified as other things, but in my mind, I think of them as history. They're narratives, and they give us a historical perspective. If you'll take those books, you're going to cover from here to about here as far as history is concerned. Anyhow, we'll deal with that more in the future. All right, quickly. Everybody see that? So you've got creation. About 1,000 years later, you've got Noah. About 1,000 years later, you got Abraham and the covenant with God. Very, very important. Remember, it's during this time period he's going to narrow in on the Jews. Then about 500 years later, you're going to get the law. Another 500 years, we're going to establish the kingdoms. About 600 years later, you're going to have a period where things go dark. They go silent. God doesn't speak. There's a lot of reasons for that, one of which I think is that it's kind of a climactic moment as we introduce Jesus, but there's 400 years that we don't have any prophecy given, etc., etc. Then Jesus comes on the scene. About 100 years after Jesus' birth, which we're going to cover in a minute, about 100 years later we got the Bible as being completed. Okay? Now, go too fast there? Let's take a minute to breathe. Everybody look at that. You got that on your paper? I hope you got a lot of blank space down here because we still got several things to cover in our doodling. All right, what I need you to do next, and you probably are drawing with, a pencil or a pen or whatever. I'm going to use red just to differentiate this, okay? But I'm going to come over here and I'm going to draw a box, okay? Actually, that box should end. I did that incorrectly. That box should end right here at the 100-year mark, okay? And the reason I'm going to do that is because we're going to expand that box. Okay, I want to take that box and I'm going to make it into another timeline because I think it's very important for you to see this particular 100-year period. Some would argue, and I'd be one of them, some would argue this is the most important 100-year period in all of humanity. And the reason is because of what takes place during that 100-year period. And so here you're going to draw yourself another timeline. We will not put a ... on either end because we actually know what happens on either end of that as far as history is concerned. But I need you to you got your timeline there? All right, we're going to divide it into equal thirds as well, or approximately equal thirds as well, okay? Everybody with me? All right, back here at the beginning then, we need to set our bookends, just like we did with the general. We need to set our bookends. The front end of this 100-year period, you're probably already way ahead of me. Draw yourself a star, okay? And then I want you to draw a building. Now I'm going to put a chimney on my building, and I'm going to tell you why. I'm even going to put, maybe more important is I'm going to put a front door on my building, okay? You probably already aware what's happening here. But this is the birth of Jesus. This is the birth of Christ. But let me give you a little factual information that a lot of folks don't know and they don't really care about, I suppose. At Christmas time, I know we kind of consolidate everything together, which is, I guess, fine as long as you understand it in the back of your mind. But you need to know that the star did not hover over the manger. Now, in general, I suppose it did because it hovered over Bethlehem. But the wise men never went to the stable. The wise men went to a house. Read the biblical account. And so the star is actually over top of a house. The shepherds went to the stable, but the star actually was over top of a house. So you got shepherds that go to the stable, but there was no little drummer boy. My favorite song at Christmas time, but he didn't happen. The animals did not talk. The Bible doesn't say anything about that. So various little myths about Christmas, if you will. One of which is the manger scene, always showing you got your three shepherds, and then you got your three wise men. Well, three wise men never went to the manger. They went to the house. Anyhow, that's just kind of other information that you can put in your head, but it's important for you to know. So you notice I've drawn a house here, okay? And so we've got the birth of Christ is this bookend. What is the bookend on the other? Well, it's this one here. It's the Bible that we've already established. So I'm going to draw you another Bible. Okay? And so over here, the other bookend is the Bible that will be completed. So this 100-year period, which is very, very significant, the most important 100 years of history, this 100-year period can be divided up as so. Now, it's not completely in thirds. The first one is, first put 33 years here, because that's going to be 33 years into that 100-year period. And then over here, we're going to put 70. That's the next major marker. They call this the first century. Talked about the first century church, all of those kind of things. This is where you're going to get a lot of the information as far as Acts the book of Acts is concerned. The book of Acts is going to start right about here and move forward. All right? But you've got the birth of Jesus. The Bible is completed at the end of the first century. What happens at 33 AD? What happens 33 years into the first century? You've got what? The cross. But, and I know that's up here, but it's very important that you also recognize that there's a second thing that happens here. I didn't leave myself enough room, so I'm going to have to draw it here beside, folks, so just stay with me. Okay? Now, here you also have, and I'm going to do this because it's very important. I don't know if they wore dresses back in the day, but I hope you can see that. This is supposed to be the church, not the building. The building's not the church. The people are the church, right? But I want you to draw those two things because, again, I'm finding, even folks who study the Bible for a long time don't recognize, did you know that the church began, the day of Pentecost, the church began only about a little less than 2 months after Jesus died. There wasn't a long period of time that happened there. Jesus dies, he's with us for 40 days, and then 10 days after his ascension, the church begins, the day of Pentecost. And so AD 33 years into this first century church, or into the first century, you're going to have the church begin. So you got the birth of Christ. 33 years later, he's going to die. Now, obviously, in here, we've got a couple things that we need to establish. I guess I'm going to have to put them up above the line. This is 12 years in. What happens at 12 years in? And then there's a second thing that's going to happen way over here at 30 years in. Just going to use that for a mystery for a moment. Just hang on to that thought because I failed to identify this one over here. 70 years into the first century, I need you to draw not a triangle, what do you call that? I need you to, it's not a square, it's a rectangle, thank you. I need you to draw your rectangle and I need you to put your box right in here. And there's a little table here, and a little table here, and a little table here. Anybody have a clue what that is? If you were to look straight down on the temple, or the tabernacle back in the day, if you were to look straight down on it, this is what it would look like. You would see the outside curtains. This is the most holy place. This is the Ark of the Covenant. And then you'd have those three pieces of furniture in there. What were they? There's the table of shewbread, the incense, and there's another one. Incense, shewbread, and somebody text me. Wow, my brain just went blank. I'll get it here in a second. All right, so this is supposed to be the temple, but watch it. We're going to exit out. And the reason we're going to exit out is because in AD 70, Jerusalem falls. And because Jerusalem falls, candlesticks. Thank you. Candlesticks was the third one. Jerusalem falls in AD 70, and the temple is destroyed. Now let's backpedal here. 12 years old. What happens at 12 years old? Draw the same thing, only smaller, okay? This is the temple. Jesus goes to the temple at 12, right? And what happens at 30? Yep, water. We're going to do the baptism thing because that's when Jesus was baptized. So there you have, excuse me, the first, oh, there you go. Lucky's got it, candlesticks. You're exactly right, Lucky. I don't know why I couldn't get that in my head, but anyhow. So here you go. You got your blown up picture of the timeline of humanity, right? Now, we're going to take this 100-year period, most important 100-year period, at least up to date, that we've ever had, and it's going to be divided into these sections, if you will. The book ends, Jesus' birth, the Bible is completed. In between that time, 12 years in, Jesus goes to the temple. We know that. 30 years in, Jesus is going to begin his ministry. He's going to be baptized. The Holy Spirit's going to come down upon him. 33 years in, he's going to die on the cross. That very same year, the church is going to be established, day of Pentecost. And then at AD 70, and this is a very important marker, the Bible actually doesn't say a whole lot about this, other than prophetically, etc. But this is when Jerusalem will fall. And that was a huge event and a time marker, especially if you read secular historians with regards to the first century. And then, so you've got the Jerusalem falls, a very bloody time, horrible time for the Jews. Jerusalem falls, and then you've got the Bible being written towards the end of the first century. Who writes the last part of our Bible? Yeah, John. Exactly. The Apostle John. Just a kind of a side note. I've always found it kind of interesting that John arguably was the best friend of Jesus. And yet he also seems to be the last one to exit this life to go into the presence of Jesus. Why would God arrange it that way? Who do you trust the most in life? Isn't it your best friends? And Jesus recognized that John had an assignment. Something very, very important. He writes us some of the most marvelous stuff we've got in all the Bible. The book of Revelation, of course, is often avoided because people are not sure exactly what this means and the symbolism and all that kind of thing. But did you know the book of Revelation actually assigns a blessing to those who read it? It also, by the way, assigns a curse to anybody who adds to it. But anyhow, so John writes all of that stuff, and that's all towards the end of the first century. And by the way, did you know that by the end of the first century, they are already compiling it, they're already circulating it, they're already making sure that it's being published and those kind of things? The Catholic Church did not put your Bible together. That was already started back in the first century, okay? And this is the most important 100 years, and again, that's a blown up version of that 100-year period right there. Questions, comments, or rebuttal, as I like to say. And next time, we'll expand it even more. Next time, I think we're going to start doodling some maps. And I know that sounds boring, geography and all that kind of thing, but I think we can make it entertaining. I think that you'll enjoy it. Now, I've got to erase all of this because the next slide will look funny with all of it on there if I don't. I hope that you got a picture of that. I'll step aside. Take a picture real quick. Get your cameras out. You need to take a picture so you have it for next week. If you didn't write it down, boop-a-doo-doo. All right, I'm done. Here we go. Got to take it off. And I don't know, my eraser doesn't seem to be as functional sometimes. I think I'm going to have to get me a rag. I had my wife buy me this eraser. I thought it was so cool because it's like magnetic and everything. And you can hold your thingy-dingies in there, but it doesn't seem to be, oh my, Sonny, you're destroying everything. It doesn't seem to take it off like I want to. I just don't know. Yeah, so now you got a dirty thing there, and I don't like that, but I don't have time because you people aren't interested in watching me do house cleaning, right? All right, there you go. It's gone. All right, let's move on to the next one. What do we got next? Oh, yeah, Q&A. Q&A is next. This is very important. Got to wrap this up so we can move on to the other stuff. All right, so what are the bookends of the 100-year period that I talked about? Remember, we drew it down here in red. What are the two bookends? The events that start the most important 100-year period and end the most important 100-year. What are the bookends? Number two, in what year did the church begin? Do you remember? I'll give you a hint. Same year Jesus dies. Okay? Folks don't. I don't know why folks don't seem to put that together, but it's just right up against it. Almost not quite 2 months later, you got the church beginning. How about number three? In what year was Jerusalem and the temple destroyed? Very, very important period during that time frame. And then number four, who wrote the last books of the Bible? I could add a number five for you teachers who need even extra material. I also drew up here on the general timeline. There were two things that we added today, if I remember right. We added, when does Moses play into the timeline? And when does the years of silence? How many years of silence were there? Those are some of the other questions that you can research and look up for yourselves. All right, there are some things that you need to take note of, various places. Go here, top right-hand corner. You can click on a link that says audio, video stuff, and you can go and get some of the other recordings. Here's some of the live stuff that we do throughout the week. I hope that you'll join and be a part of that. I've got several upcoming trips into Louisiana to do some meetings. I'll be gone for several weeks at a time. And so we're going to work through that. Some of the stuff I'll be able to actually do while I'm on the road. Others I'll just make a recording, make sure it's up here ready for you all to go when it's time. But anyhow, that's what we do throughout the week. And so I hope you'll join us, especially tomorrow, Monday Morning Line, where we get plumb silly. All right, let's do some prayer list. The friend that I talked to you about, she made it back to China, and I believe tomorrow starts back in with teaching English. So God bless her, and thank you for praying for her. Then we've got Joe from, I haven't got this confirmed, but my buddy Dale hadn't said yet, but Joe is the father of Dale. And again, I'm not sure his issues, but he was asked to be prayed for, and we will pray for it. Denise from Arkansas continues to struggle with her leg. Denise from Louisiana praying for grandchildren, as I recall. That was what that was about. Oh yeah, Bryson and his youth group. I want to stop and pause here for a moment. Had a really eventful time last weekend. You might recall he took his youth group. He's in full-time youth ministry, and he took his youth group over to the east Gatlinburg area to attend Winterfest. And on the way back, they had all kinds of van problems. He actually had to stay with the van. They had another one of the adults bring all the kids home, and he and Victoria had to spend an extra night on the road. It was just kind of a nutso event. But they're back, and they're safe, and I'm thankful that you prayed for them. Tina continues to have other issues. Thankfully, it seems that her breast cancer has been taken care of, but I pray that you'll continue to pray for Tina. And then Linda, what are we at? 7 weeks remaining, Linda, of your chemotherapy. And then Luke from Kentucky, epilepsy and horrible headaches. Remember him. Now, I've got to make a confession. I think there were 2 people last week who gave me a prayer request, and I didn't get it. I apologize. It's really, my Sundays are nuts. And because as quick as I'm done here, I'm going to run into the house, put on my tie, and I'm going to rush to my own home congregation just in time to go in and greet the visitors before we have our services begin, and I get up and I preach another sermon. Once that's done, we generally go out and get something to eat real fast, because in the afternoons, I have a Bible study with the family every Sunday afternoon. Then at 6 o'clock, we rush back to the church house. We have another service on Sunday night. It's just a boom, 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 boom. Anyhow, and so by Monday morning, I've got notes scattered all over my office. I'm still cleaning up, and I'm putting the cameras back and all of those kind of things. And I forgot last Sunday to write down who these prayer requests are. And I hate it. I'm just so very, very sorry. Lecky says my daughter had surgery. I saw that on Facebook. And broken foot, pray for healing. Absolutely. I have been. But that's Lecky's daughter, Lecky Goff's daughter. Well, maybe you can see it there. I don't know if that pans down how that works. But there was 2 people last week who asked me, and I need to get you on here on the list too. Lecky, I'll try to be better next week and make sure I get your daughter. I'm going to step aside here because I think I've got a record of it over here. I noticed this because on Monday mornings I do the same thing. And let's see. Oh yeah, looky here. Because on Monday mornings I'm a little cheesier on Monday mornings, and I've got I put it on a whiteboard. I'm actually out in the truck when I do it. A good friend of mine, Ashley's mother, had brain surgery. 2 dear women that I go to church with, their mom, Velma, I think she's doing a little bit better, actually. Let's see. And Slade, a good friend of mine, Slade will be traveling in the coming weeks, coming down from New York to be with his folks. So there's a list of individuals that we need to be praying for and considering, and I'll do my best to get those up next time. And Lecky, I'm going to step aside right now. You guys go to praying before we do our sermon time. I'm going to step aside right now. I'm going to put your daughter's name on my list. Okay, Deborah, appreciate your prayers. Yes, well, I'll be happy to add you, Deborah. And thank you for saying that this is a blessing. Good morning. Lord's Day Live sermon time. And I appreciate you so much for being with us. Got some congregations I know that are trying to figure this thing out. They're wanting to use the material, and they can't afford a preacher, whatever it may be. Maybe they can afford, but we just have a lack of preachers, to be honest with you. And they're using this, and I'm thankful for that. If you're one of those congregations, thank you for tuning in and using this. I pray that it's a blessing. If you're just shut in, can't get out to your own services or whatever it may be, I got a trucker buddy who often tunes in because he can't get out to his own services. Whatever the reason is, I'm thankful that you're with us, and I pray that this will be a blessing time. You might recall, we're dealing with the subject of involvement. And this is our third installment on involvement. Very, very important subject matter. Many of you who are using this are folks who come from a small congregation, whatever it may be. And so because you're using this for that, there's a good chance that you are either struggling with involvement or you'd like to get a greater degree of involvement with your little fellowship. And I'm hoping that some of this material will be a blessing to you. Let me see if I can X that out. There you go. Those clicks. Do you hear those clicks going on? That's folks who are responding and giving me comments and that kind of thing. And every time there's a click, then it's a distraction to you and to me. And so I'll take that, and I silence that now. So involvement, that's where we're at. Involvement. What I did with the word involvement is I took it and I separated it, as you can see here. And the I in involvement stands for included. We've already covered that. Let's go back in the archived videos that I have, sunnychannels.com, top right-hand corner, audio videos. Click on that link and it'll take you. You can look at that lesson that we've done in the past. Today, we're going to talk about voluntary. This is the third lesson because ahead of included, we had an introductory lesson, you might recall. It was very important. We actually compared the Great Commission with Acts chapter 2. And so Jesus gives us assignment. Did they do it? Yeah. Look at Acts chapter 2. It's really, I think, a marvelous parallel. You see what Jesus commands in Matthew 28. Just a few days later, they're actually implementing in Acts chapter 2. Really interesting. But anyhow, that's the first one. That'll be labeled number 1. This is actually number 2 included. This morning is number 3. Again, you want those, go to there, and you can find those archived. And so this morning we're dealing with voluntary. Next time, God willing, we'll deal with vested, and then the MENT is for mentored. Voluntary. Interesting passage we want to deal with this morning. From Matthew chapter 25, you've got this story about a guy who's going to go on a long journey, and he's going to entrust his servants with things that need to be done, etc. Let me give you a little background about servitude in the first century. There was cruelty that took place without a doubt. But when we think servant, we think about the horrendous things that took place in the opening days of our nation. And the reason for the Civil War that we had fought, all of those kind of things. And that was not always the case during the first century. I'm told that there actually were some pretty decent masters even in America. Doesn't mean that it was a good thing. I'm just saying that they took care of those who were enslaved to them to a better degree than many others did. Well, in the first century, some folks who were considered slaves were actually, or servants, maybe I should say, were actually more like employees. They had a lot more freedoms than you would expect with slavery. All right, just keep that kind of in the back of your mind. That's why this particular story seems a little odd, that this guy's going to go off and he's going to entrust his stuff to a slave or a servant. Again, servant's probably a better word here. These people were probably more trusted individuals that were over parts of his home and the work and the things that he owned, that kind of thing. All right, that's the background. All right, now come back. Again, it will be like a man who's going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and to another one bag, each according to his ability. We'll deal with that in just a second. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one who had 2 bags gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. But the first point that I want you to see with regards to this idea of voluntary, all right, it's not just that you should be included, that was the last lesson, but you need to volunteer to be included. You're going to get a lot more, speaking to church leaders right now, you're going to get a lot more out of individuals who volunteer for something than folks who are assigned something. I'm not saying it's wrong to give out assignments, but what I'm saying is if somebody actually comes up and says, hey, I want that job, that means that they're bringing something to the table that this entire chapter is all about, and that is initiative. Initiative. They themselves have chosen. They want to do this. You're going to see in this story a lot of initiative. Now, I understand there's an assignment being given in that the master's giving them these bags of gold. I get that. But you'll notice the lack of information as to what they're supposed to do with it. Why would the master do that? Because he wanted the three guys to act upon it with initiative. My first point is adventure. It's very important that if you're going to develop involvement within your home congregation, within your little study group, whatever, if you're going to develop involvement, it's important that they not only be included, but that they volunteer to be included. In other words, it needs to be made attractive. It needs to be something that they themselves can want to do. They can dream about it. And because of that, they're going to bring a lot to the table, more so than somebody who's just given the assignment and say, okay, do this, 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 and this. It's actually the difference between what makes the New Testament, the New Covenant, effective, and what didn't allow effectiveness in the Old Covenant. There was so much in the Old Law that was just do this, 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 and this. It's not that they weren't supposed to take initiative, it's just that it didn't really promote it as much as it would in the first century church. The first century church comes along, established by Jesus, and now it's interesting. Old Testament, what do? Old Testament, God tells them everything, including how much to give. 10%, tithe. This is what you're supposed to give. In the New Testament, what does Jesus say? What are the instructions of God in the New Testament? It's not 10%. It's to give as you have been prospered. You see what that does? You're to examine your heart, and you are to act upon it with initiative. That makes it more of an adventure. And by the way, it seems to me that that would make it more appealing than getting an assignment. So, I probably ought to be giving more than 10% if I really love God. Because I get to choose an expression of initiative. It needs to be an adventure, number one. They were each given the bags according to their ability. In other words, the master did not give them something that they didn't have the ability to deal with. The guy with 5 evidently had a little more ability than the guy with 2. And the guy with 2 had more ability than the guy with 1. But it wasn't that he was trying not to be complimentary as much as he was just understanding the skill set of each of these 3 guys. And so he said, okay, your adventure number 1, your adventure is going to involve 5 bags. Next guy, 2 bags. Next guy, 1. But you got the abilities to deal with this. Now, I'm not going to tell you what you have to do with them, but I'm going to tell you, eventually I'm going to come back. And so do something with it. And so according to their ability, to church leaders, as you shape the adventure for those that you're trying to assign to a committee or a work of the church, whatever it may be, remember to keep it adventuresome, but also remember that sometimes the amount of opportunities given to a person can encroach upon the adventure. Sometimes people don't have, all the time, people don't have the same skill sets. Some folks are able to dream a little bigger than others are able to dream. And some folks, when you give them a big dream, it just overwhelms them and the adventure goes away. So you got to be careful, church leaders, as you deal with this one. But this is where I really wanted to go. My question that I got for you, though, with these 3 guys, as far as the adventure is concerned, is what kept the guy with 1 bag from being adventurous? Why did this guy go out back and dig a hole and throw it in the hole and bury it and keep it for the master when the master came back? Now, if you read the rest of the context, you can obviously tell that the guy's afraid of the master and other things factor in there. But I think it's bigger than this. I think it's a lack of initiative. I think this guy's lazy. I think he doesn't recognize the need to give honor to the master by doing something with the open doors the master has provided. Big application to you and I in the church today. We need to be really careful about squelching the liberties of our brothers and sisters. If the Bible says do it, do it. If the Bible says don't do it, don't do it. But if the Bible's silent, we just need to be silent because that's an area of liberty. Romans chapter 14. And we need to be people who are not like this one talent guy who lack initiative, but rather when given the opportunity to express ourselves, like with giving, for instance, we're not told how much to give. We're just told to give as we've been prospered and to give with a cheerful heart. Those are the instructions. That's all. And so, then we need to celebrate the journey of initiative. And that will allow us then to have adventure. But when elderships and church leaderships get into the mode of manipulating through legalisms, they begin to, I think, squelch adventure. Yes, if the Bible tells us not to, don't do it. If the Bible says that we should do it, get after it. But if the Bible just doesn't address it, remember, there is no law of silence. If there is a law of silence, it is this: be silent. If God didn't address it, then there's an opportunity for liberty to happen there. And we need to allow adventure to take place. So why did the guy dig a hole? He lacked initiative. He lacked the maturity, evidently, to the discipline, I should say, to really deal with the bag of money. Because remember, they were given a court. The master knew this guy had the ability to do something with one bag, but he chose not to do it. Let's get personal. How many of you sitting there watching this are just go to church people? You got your regular pew and you attend pretty regular, but you're not really involved beyond that, because after all, you pay your dues by going and showing up and attending. Not a lot of initiative there. Anybody can sit in a pew and let somebody preach at them or sing at them. My question is, are you going to be involved to the point that you are going to be adventuresome? That you're actually going to volunteer. I want that job. Number 2, it's not just the adventure, but it's also the acknowledgement. You see what happens as after a long time, the master is going to come back. And of those servants, he returned, settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags brought 5 out more. And the master said, entrusted to me 5 bags. See, I've gained you 5 more. That's what he says to the master. Verse 21, his master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. By the way, same thing happens to the guy with 2 bags. And so the guys who make investments, that take initiative, they're going to get bragged on. Well done, good and faithful servant. Now, we're not going to deal with the one guy, the one bad guy, until here in a minute. But let's just stay with the positive for the moment. So, to the church leaders and others out there who like to prompt more involvement, let me suggest to you that acknowledgement is huge. But it's important that you understand your people enough to recognize how they want to be acknowledged. Many of you out there know me and you know my wife. Cindy doesn't regularly appear on things like this, does she? Every once in a while I'll throw up a picture on Facebook, but she doesn't even like that. Cindy's a kind of behind the scenes kind of, now she's really involved. She teaches class and all that, but she's not really interested in that kind of public acknowledgement. But she wants acknowledgement. Everybody wants their work acknowledged. Now, it may not be a public acknowledgement, and it may not even be that they themselves want acknowledged for the work, but everybody wants their work acknowledged, because if you didn't, you wouldn't do it. Nobody does something so that 10 minutes later they'll just step on it, tear it up, throw it away, whatever. Everybody wants their work to be acknowledged to the point that it's used, it's appreciated, etc. And this is the challenge for church leaders then. You got to know your people so well that you understand the difference between a Sonny Childs and a Cindy Childs. Sonny Childs, bring them up front, give them a plaque, high fives, all that thing. I'm good with that because I'm big and I got a big mouth and all. You know me, okay? But you do that for Cindy, and you're going to squelch your adventure. You got to be careful with the acknowledgments. Everybody wants acknowledged. Even the guy who's sitting back there and saying, I don't want anybody to talk about what I did. Even that guy wants acknowledged. Maybe him not personally, but he wants his work acknowledged. Otherwise, he wouldn't be doing it. And for church leaders, it's important for you to differentiate between the 2 segments. And there's, I guess, even degrees in the middle between those 2 areas. But acknowledgement is something that has to happen. Jesus, in the parable, he talks about the master giving acknowledgement. So this is our example that we're using. And so you can see that it plays out being very, very biblical. And then number 3, it's not just acknowledgement, but there's also advancement that takes place. Watch it. His master replied, well done, good faithful. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. And then the same thing happens down here with the guy with 2 bags. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. This part relates directly to what was said earlier with regards to he gave them their bags of gold according to their abilities. Okay. And by the way, the one bag guy, he could have been in this scenario. All 3 of them could have got bragged on. All 3 of them could have been advanced. I suspect, though, that the guy with 2 didn't advance quite as far as the guy with 5. In fact, that seems to play out at the end when you find out who gets the 1 bag of gold when the bad guy is thrown out into the darkness. But my point is that there is everybody needs or wants to have a goal that they're going to be able to advance to a certain level. I think it's really important that we be careful about treating the church like a corporation, something of that nature. You got to be really careful with that kind of thing. But at the same time, it's also important for us to recognize that as people grow, there should be an advancement of an appreciation for those individuals. Do you ever wonder why elders are supposed to be elders, older? Well, it's because they've advanced. They've moved through the ranks of the church, as it were. They moved through the ranks of growing up. They moved through the ranks, most importantly, in biblical sense, they moved through the ranks of managing their own family. They have proven then to the church that they can manage their own family. That's why it's specific. If they can manage their own family, then they can manage the church. And those who can't and have proven over the years that they didn't do a good job managing their own family, they don't need to be elders. They don't need to be leading a church. How can you lead the family of God if you couldn't lead your own family? But you see the advancements that are happening here? So advancements is a very biblical concept as well. Everybody wants to advance. Everybody wants to know that they're moving towards something. Obviously, the biggest advancement of all is that one day we'll stand before the Lord and He'll say, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." That's the big one. So if you don't get any other advancement in this life but that one, that's enough to live for. I get that. But just like a person needs acknowledgement, a person needs advancement. But just like a person with acknowledgement might be different, persons might be different depending on how they want to be acknowledged, same thing is true as far as advancements are concerned. You got to know your people. Told my people last week, I said, unless I put my legs under your table, I sit in your living room, I see the pictures hanging on your wall, I look up and recognize whether or not you dusted your ceiling fans. We're not really very close, are we? We're not close enough probably for me to know how you would like to be acknowledged and how you would like to advance. We got to know our people. Then, by way of conclusion, he says, then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant." I said he was lazy, didn't I? "You lazy servant." Verse 27. "You should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. Throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." You see the conclusion? God expects initiative. He demands it. In fact, it seems to me in this passage that if you were to look at it, it sounds to me like that initiative is a key factor as to whether or not you will spend eternity in His presence. Let me see if I can prove that to you. I don't have it for the screen's sake because there's just too much there. But what I'd like for you to do when the lesson is over, I'd like for you to open up your Bibles and I'd like for you to read the rest of the chapter. Actually, I'd like for you to read the context before in Matthew 25 and the context after in Matthew 25. You see, this is the middle story. And it's interesting what happened. In the first story, you've got the story of the 10 virgins. 5 of them wise, 5 of them foolish. The 5 who were wise get to go into the wedding feast. Why? Because they took initiative. Because they recognized the need that they needed to be in charge of making sure they had enough oil. They thought it through. They rationalized. They dreamed. They went on the adventure. They couldn't hardly wait for the bridegroom to show up, and so they were prepared. You see, initiative. Now skip to the other side of our story that we've talked about this morning. The other side is where the Lord says to them, at the end of time, He says to them, when I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you gave me food and clothed me, etc. And they say to Him, well, Lord, when did we do that? And He said, as often you did this to others, you did it to me. Remember that? That's the other side. That's the bookends of this chapter. You know, I find it remarkable that in all 3 of these stories, the 10 virgins, the 3 guys with money bags, and at the end, whether you gave me food when I was hungry and clothed me, etc., all 3 of these stories have to do with initiative. But maybe the big point is this. All 3 of them also have to do with the end judgment, as to whether or not you are worthy to enter into the joys of the Master. It seems to me that in Matthew chapter 25, all 3 of these have to do with initiative. May I call it volunteerism, our word for the day. Being a volunteer. All right, I got to shut down, but I want to end this thing. I don't think I had anything more. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I got to do this. Okay, I may not get to do my story. I don't know if I'm going to have time. All right, here's your practical suggestions. I forgot that we do this. All 3 of the points. Number 1, adventure. Dreams are what adventures are made of, and effective leadership celebrates initiative. How much freedom do you have? How much freedom do you have? I missed the you. Do you have to envision and invest? Number 2, acknowledgement. Public validation is not effective for everyone, but everyone wants to expect their efforts to be acknowledged in some way. Leaderships must know their team well enough to validate them effectively. Do you feel validated? And then number 3, advancement. The ultimate goal must be advancement in the heavenly kingdom, obviously. Leaders must focus their team on the supreme advancements that are to come. That's heaven. Do you serve with heaven in mind? Read Colossians chapter 3 and verse 23 when we're done. And you'll find that to be, I think, quite enlightening. So I gave you 2 assignments, didn't I? Read this passage, and I need you to read the bookends of Matthew chapter 25. I think that you'll understand what I'm saying there. Next time, vested. We'll deal with vested. All right. Yeah, I got a few minutes left. Back in the day, I wasn't allowed to listen to this particular song. My father was in the military, and he felt that it was important for us to defend our nation, and he didn't like it when folks... for instance, didn't honor those who came home from Vietnam, the Korean War, whatever it may be. He didn't appreciate those who threw their dog tags over the fence, etc. He wasn't a big fan of those individuals. And so when this song came out, this was kind of taboo to us as far as our family is concerned. But I'm just going to read the last little bit of this. This one's called Billy, Don't Be a Hero. Billy, don't. I was going to call him Johnny. Billy, Don't Be a Hero. Songwriter Mitch Murray and Peter Calander, I guess it is, Universal Music Publishing Group. The soldier blues were trapped on a hillside. The battle raging all around. The sergeant cried, "We've got to hang on, boys. We've got to hold this piece of ground. I need a volunteer to ride out and bring me back some extra men." And Billy's hand was up in a moment, forgetting all the words she said. Previous part of the song, she's begging Billy, don't go into the military. Don't go off. Don't go leave me. And so once he's decided he is going to go, she says, keep your head low. Please don't be a hero. Don't be a volunteer. She said, Billy, don't be a hero. Don't be a fool with your life. Billy, don't be a hero. Come back and make me your wife. And as Billy started to go, she said, keep your pretty head low. Billy, don't be a hero. Come back to me. The conclusion of the song then is this. He's rode off. He volunteered to ride off and get some extra men. It says, I heard his fiancée got a letter that told how Billy died that day. The letter said that he was a hero. She should be proud he died that way. Last line of the song. I heard she threw the letter away. Being a volunteer puts you at risk. And it opens you up to criticism. It's going to open you up to a world of things. But I think I've made the point pretty clear, Jesus certainly did in Matthew chapter 25, that those who stay with him forever in eternity are going to be individuals who have a volunteer heart. They're going to take initiative. And so the second part, don't just be included. Volunteer to be included. Because Jesus looks on the heart. Don't be like the guy with one bag of gold. Well, there you go. Sunday Morning Live, I pray that it's been a blessing to you. I'm going to scamper off to my home congregation, but I'm grateful that you were with me for the ride. I pray that you will continue to seek ways that you can be involved and you can draw others into involvement as well. Next time, vested. Sonny Childs, be there. Matthew 16:26.